HLI was inaugurated on 11th August 2018 and is inspired by Theosophy, whose motto being there is no religion higher than truth, also known in Sanskrit as Satyat Nasti Parodharma. The one truth being that universal brotherhood is a fact in nature and universe. So is interconnectedness, and humanity being one and connected both spiritually, intellectually, and morally. Also, we see on the physical plane in various ways we are linked to each other. Further, the karma of whole of humanity is connected and is one karma. Realization of this truth by exploring the practical applications of the ideal of universal brotherhood of humanity is the core aim of HLI. One of the ways to achieve this is by serious study, review of books, discussion, contemplation, talks, and seminars. In this spirit, we have today's topic, which is a book review of the book titled Intelligent Evolution: How Alfred Russel Wallace's World of Life Challenged Darwinism. In fact, this is the part 2 of the talk. In our last session, we covered the part 1 of the same. Just to briefly summarize the key points covered in part 1, we looked into Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. We also studied and understood Wallace's theory, which was based on intelligent universe. However, Darwin, we saw, never postulated the human descent from apes. It was the overzealous Darwinians who gave currency to this idea. Further, we also see that Wallace, being highly intuitive and founder of the discipline of biogeography, he ingeniously masters his keen observations of the life of the natural world and sees it through that there is clear, intelligent design and there is purpose, and this purpose being to facilitate man's need, which is physical, intellectual, aesthetic, and spiritual. Later on, we also see that Wallace reviews our modern industrial civilization in the light of this grand vision and sees how the intelligent evolution unfolds and also provides inputs and warns into the terrible consequences of this new civilization, modern industrial civilization. And this was basically captured during the time 1910 when he wrote his magnum opus, World of Life. Now, that being said, the speaker for today's talk, that is the part 2, continuation of part 1, is our very learned Shri M.L. Ramprakash, who is the founder member of HLI and a lifelong devoted student of Theosophy. Now over to Shri M.L. Ramprakash. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikash. Good evening, friends. Now, as already announced, we are considering the second part of the book review of the book Intelligent Evolution, which was edited by Michael A. Flannery, who is an eminent scholar in the history of science. In the first part of the book review, which was held on the Zoom platform on 25th of February, a historical background of Darwin's early education and his grooming in the materialistic school of philosophy of modern science, that is strictly empirical method and inductive reasoning and his non-teleological worldview. This was given last week in the previous presentation of part 1. And it was shown in that the interpretation Darwin put on his thoroughgoing observations in the natural world, and the conclusions he arrived at was wholly non-teleological, meaning with the assumption that the whole natural processes are purely mechanical, devoid of any extraneous or intrinsic intelligence or purpose, but wholly accidental and random. That is the basic assumption of modern science. Even today, it holds good. Wallace, a co-worker with Darwin and equally eminent and more experienced, in fact, while endorsing and complimenting Darwin for his great work and his keen observations, he, however, disagreed with the mechanistic interpretation of evolution that the whole of natural selection in the evolution of species takes place by randomly acting blind forces. He, as a counter theory, put forward the intelligent evolution. He arrived at this conclusion by very thoroughgoing observation in the natural world for nearly 12 years. The observations he interpreted the observations he made and argued that the whole process of evolution by natural selection has an underlying cause, efficient cause, intelligent, organizing, directive force or principle. And it is purposive. And he marshaled voluminous data and evidence from his observations in the natural world. Advanced it as a counter theory to Darwin's non-teleological mechanistic interpretation of biological evolution. So, to understand Wallace's classic world of life and appreciate its value and its importance to the future of scientific progress and of the civilization itself, it is necessary for us to have a clearer idea of the two schools of thought. One is non-teleological, in other words, mechanistic methodological naturalism, on the one hand, to which Darwin subscribed, in which he was brought up and groomed, and the teleological synthesis of biological evolution and cosmology, which Wallace worked on. So we are now considering the second part of the review. We'll be focusing on Wallace's teleological synthesis and worldview, in contrast to the Darwin's mechanistic model. We must remember what are the objects of the author of the book Intelligent Evolution, the author Michael Flannery. What's his object? It is educational. He brought out this very important book for its educational value, in order to educate the public and the academic people to be open-minded, to have open-minded consideration of the methods and results and consequences of the two modes and methods of science. His object was to basically stimulate thought, free mind from bias in inquiry, and also to rescue Wallace from obscurity and bring back to the consideration of public and academic institutions the seminal work of Wallace and its great importance. So, it's Alfred Wallace's World of Life, a manifesto of intelligent evolution. Now, the scope of the author, the scope of the review of the author is to bring forward from the work of Wallace in World of Life a mass of evidence from minute observations indicative of directing and organizing intelligence in the nature's processes. Now, Wallace's work is so voluminous in gathering this data and presenting evidence. The author highlights only those portions of the work which Wallace considered most important and prominent feature of his book, which best presents comprehensively his theory of intelligent evolution. He shows logically intelligent guidance in nature's processes. So he consults the 1910 edition of Wallace's World of Life, and the selected portions he presents to us in 9 chapters. Now, prominent features of the book, The Intelligent Evolution of Michael Flannery, is two questions, two prominent features. Two prominent features he presents to us. A critical examination of the underlying problem. What is life itself? And what is that mysterious power of growth and reproduction? Now, questions have been evaded by Darwin, and these two questions are even today are set aside by the modern schools of science. So these two views are, one is mechanistic model and other teleological. Now, contents of the 9th chapter, 9 chapters. In the chapter 1, he contrasts the non-teleological view with the teleological evidence of intelligent evolution. And in the 2nd chapter, Wallace brings forward evidence gathered from progressive biological evolution revealed in the geological strata, in the paleontological study and research, clearly indicative of guiding intelligence and purpose in evolving complex forms of life from simple forms. And in the third chapter, very ingeniously, he describes the marvelous intelligent mechanism of birds' feathers and the insect lives, the dynamics of internal structure of living beings, and development of man, clearly indicating directive life principle. In chapter 4 and 5, he gathers evidence from the Wallace's work how inorganic and organic products serve man's physical, moral, aesthetic, and intellectual and spiritual development. And in the chapter 6, he brings forward evidence from the mysteries of the cell, evidence of intelligent working. In his time, molecular biology had not made the advances that we have today, seeing the advances that science has made in the field of molecular biology and genetical science, in fact, gives further support to the theory of intelligent evolution of Wallace. And in the 7th chapter, he speaks of law of diversity, which pervades the world of life, and what is the purpose of it. And the 8th chapter, the use of pain in the law of evolution. Both Darwin and Wallace speak of it, and we see the contrast between the two views. And infinite variety is the law of the universe. It has a purpose, and it has the infinite variety in the world of life, in the universe, in fact, has an efficient cause and a definite purpose. He demonstrated this. Now, coming to the question of what is life? The contrast between the two schools is again brought up. Now, the view of materialistic school of science is that there is nothing known as consciousness, life, of intelligence apart from matter. That is a basic assumption. And life is a product of chemical and physical forces. So, any idea of indwelling guidance of special nature is all superstitious. So, mystery of consciousness is a physiological problem. So, it must be reduced to physical and chemical phenomena. And even today, the same view holds good. So, Haeckel was an ardent champion of this school of thought, postulated a universal substance, borrowing from Spinoza's philosophy of universal substance, according to which the thought and sensitivity are all inherent in matter itself. So, Haeckel postulated the basic unit of life called the cell has in it inherent potentiality of consciousness, life, and psychic reflexes, but itself is unconscious. There is nothing apart from the material of which it is made So his theory is monistic mechanical process, the law of substance. Now, what is and whence life? Now, look at the two schools of thought. The contrast is the school of thought of mechanistic, materialistic school, and then we'll contrast it with the other. Haeckel and Huxley were the two great stalwarts of the mechanistic methodology of science. According to them, no spirit, there's no spiritual world at all. If there are other worlds, they all must be material and physical. And the rising or evolution of the worlds and their existence and disappearance, they're all chance occurrence. And material worlds are eternal and infinite. And Huxley maintained, he makes the problem of life. Actually, if we study the mystery of nutrition, assimilation of nutrients, and their distribution and translocation and growth, all this are very clearly indicative of intelligent process. And also indicates the work of the vital force apart from the matter in which it works. But he opposed the view of vital force. And he contradicts himself. It is very difficult to deny the action of vital force. And to this, Huxley unconsciously succumbed. He says life is the cause, not the consequence of organism. And at the same time, he contradicts himself in saying that the basic elements which go into organic matter, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, combine with other elements to form compounds, but they're all lifeless. Now, the author of the book we are reviewing takes up this statement, life is a cause, not the consequence of organism, and then points out the contradiction in it. If life is a cause of organism, then life must be antecedent to the organism, and it must be connected to the spirit with thought, which is the directive energy. And he shows that Wallace presents a juster conception of the mystery of life, and then gives a synthetic teleological worldview, a grand scheme of evolution through adaptation to the outer world. So, no dead matter can perform such complex functions without a directing intelligence acting on it. Now, general conclusions as to life and development. In Wallace's work, he presents vast amount of data he has collected, evidence he has collected with a geological record in his paleontological researches. And right from the early ages to the later ages as the life progressively developed, which we can see here in this chart. In the Proterozoic age, 3,500 billion years ago, earliest forms of life probably were merely unicellular organisms. And then Later, Paleozoic age, which is called the primary age, and then Mesozoic secondary age, and Cenozoic tertiary age. We get a progressive evolution of species. So in the Paleozoic age, invertebrates become common, 500 million years to 240 million years. And here, the oceans were plenty of life, and land probably had very few animals. And we see that statement here. In Paleozoic age, primary age, there were abundant vegetation. There were vertebrates that begin to appear, and primary forms of life like zoophytes and so on in various numbers. And sea was full of life, but animal life on the land was scanty. And you see the amphibious and reptiles and centipedes appearing here. And in the secondary age, in the Mesozoic age, vegetation under pressure from land animals, and evolution tended towards higher forms of flowering plants and the mutual interaction between vegetation and animal life. So in Mesozoic age, the cryptograms gradually give place to phanerograms. And you can see here in the paleontological tree an idea of how this evolution takes place here. And in the tertiary period is the time when man begins to appear. The land is full of luxuriant vegetation, and coalfields are formed, and specialized reptiles begin to disappear. The giant saurians begin to dwindle in size, and then give place to mammals, birds, and specialized insects. And reptiles assume diminutive size, feeding on insects and roots, and so on. So this is a view of the progressive development of life during these geological ages. Now, it is shown that in early geological epochs, no colored flowers or edible colored fruits were to be seen. So it was a later development, later evolutionary development. And Wallace lays great stress on the color scheme in nature, color, design, and pattern. Color has a great evolutionary significance. He says perception of colors is a later development in the evolution of species. Now, and he also says that there's a clear lines of distinct evolutionary lines of plants, birds and reptiles, mammals, and humans developing parallelly and also mutually in interaction. And there are separate lines of evolution having different uses and purposes. So continuing the same point, Wallace says that varied animal types fill space left by reptiles, huge reptiles, saurians. And we see a metamorphosis of plant and animal life through secondary to tertiary period. And he says it was essential for production of higher mammals and for their varied needs. And also to prepare for the uh, field or area of field of development of human mind and higher faculties and physical needs. Varied plant groups of myriad potentialities of phenomograms lie hidden in the basic units of life. It all served the basic needs of man and animal. Besides meeting physical needs, he says it also served the aesthetic refinement of man. And then all the fruits, scents, the savors, mountains, rivers, valleys, forests, meadows, these all came into being the tertiary and the quaternary period, a field for man's experience, for his pleasure, for his development, besides biological needs of other species. And then varied use of domestic animals and birds serve the needs and pleasures of man. And the domestic animals, they're, they're what Darwin calls as unconscious selection, and then the humans taking up the breeding and so on, added to the new pleasures and needs of man. Now, here he says there's a clear evidence of the overseeing mind, foreseeing mind. From the very first dawn of life, we see vegetable and animal cells in their development. We clearly see directed and organized intelligence with the object of providing for the needs and growth of development of man's spiritual nature. And he goes on to show that the Mesozoic reptiles, which existed for several hundred million years, served a limited purpose, and their numerical increase was also kept at bay. And their brain structures never increased or altered during those millions of years. One of the purpose they served was to keep the very crude cryptogamic vegetation which was abounding on Earth, to keep them down by the herbivore reptiles and to make way for evolution of other higher animal types and give time for the higher forms to secure foothold to start on diverging lines, advance towards perfect and glorious world of life. So now this is one of the ingenious work of Wallace. He shows that in the life of birds and insects, you see very clear evidence of the directive principle of life. Now, earliest reptilian birds, Archaeopteryx, we see the diagram here shortly. It's less compact, less effective for flight than modern birds, and modified and adapted to changing environment, right? And he says that modern families of genera begin to appear during the early tertiary period. And when the flying serpent was being evolved at the same time, birds, evolution of birds with feathers also had begun to develop. So these two groups of flying vertebrates developed into opposite principles. Now, he shows that this is a reptilian, a reptile metamorphosed into serpent, into a flying bird or Archaeopteryx. You see the tail and the neck and the tooth, the mouth, all are of the features of a serpent, and these forelimbs with the feathers at the end served as the flying apparatus, and you see the limbs here. Now, he shows that this is metamorphosed into wings. The hands is transformed into wings and attached to the main body, and the digits or fingers of the hand partly modified to support the wings and partly as claws. And these limbs are all consolidated or condensed to form the bird's body. That's what it says here. So bird must have started on the principle of condensation and specialization of forelimbs for flight by means of feathers. So the other extension of one reptilian digit support wing membrane, representing the other probably for suspension, as in the bats. So here he comes to the marvel of mystery of feathers, which clearly show a preconceived design, very complex and difficult. Now, as we saw in the earlier slide, the jointed bones reduced to develop the framework of wings with minimum size and maximum muscular power, and the enlarged bones, the bones are all, joint bones are all transformed, and the chest muscles are enlarged to give maximum muscular power for wing support. And then design of wings used for flight is very ingenious. It combines the properties of strength, lightness, and flexibility, which making for a perfect instrument of flight. So he shows that the line of evolution towards continuous membrane of our wings was given up or discontinued, and it was substituted with broad overlapping feather veins to form the wings of the bird. It's formed by the central rib of the feather of great strength, elasticity, and lightness. We'll see the diagram of it. Now, these feathers are wonderfully attached, like in the diagram here, interlocked, forming a self-supporting elastic structure of great delicacy. Now, the beauty is that though it may be injured accidentally, it is able to, very even mild impact may damage it, yet it is able to sustain any amount of air pressure. And it is self-correcting. In case of injury, it is able to separate the adjacent barbs and repair itself, self-repairing. And we see in the formation of the feathers which clothe the body of the birds and the limbs in order to safeguard it from heat and cold. And there are endless varieties of design, shape, color, and ornamentation. And feathers are all movable. They are erectile in the sense that they can be separated by the bird in order to expose it to air for drying when it is wet, or open up the feathers for cooling in case of heat. So you see here how the membranous wing of the flying serpent has been modified into this marvelous, ingenious biological engineering called the feathers attached to the body, but uh, with this mechanism firmly held in place, overlapping each other, the veins overlapping each other. Now, look at the diagram of this feather anatomy. It is in a greater detail than that. Now, the mechanism of bird flight depends on the form, the curvature of feathers, and curvature of wings, and also the muscular strength. He shows that in the rapid downstroke, the combined feathers of wings close up to make wings airtight, strong. And in the upward stroke, the wings feather turn up their axis to allow air to pass between them, like this. So, and with support of the hinder parts and the tail, it is able to maintain the forward motion. There is no blood circulation in feathers, he shows. Feathers are attached only to the body, and only at the point of the body that is it receives the feathers receive their needed elements from the blood circulation, and they are very firmly held by the muscles and tendons of the rudimentary hands which have been modified into wings. Now, he goes on to show that the formation of cells of the body, bones, cells of the body, the muscles, the feathers, each with distinctive feathers, is all happen by the blood circulation, distributing the exact constituents required for different functions. It is a selective and directive and constructive power, all welding them together into bones, muscles, and so on, and feathers, light, strong, elastic matter of feathers. Now, what is the nature of the power determining every separate feather growing into exact shape? Now, no two feathers are exactly alike, but some are modified to serve special purposes. Now, again, you see the coloring matter. How do the feathers get their coloring matter? Through the distribution by the blood. What is the directing agency determining this? And each feather taking exact share of the constituents from the blood in the production of a whole pattern and coloring, always maintaining the same symmetry as a whole, as in this. Now, the birds shed their feathers every year on both sides, and they're replaced by the feather with exactly the same color, with exactly the same design. Now, biological development due to merely blind chance or the result of guiding intelligence. That is the that is the that is the that is the question that Wallace poses before us and shows that it can never be blind chance with the result of guiding intelligence. Now, in the same way, he shows that insect life also exhibit extraordinary uh, purpose and intelligent directive principle. Now, take the mystery of life cycles of this particular family of the most prominent family of insect, Lepidoptera. Now, if you see the life cycle of this particular insect, the moth or the butterfly lays the egg, and from the egg hatches out the larva or the caterpillar, and caterpillar feeds profusely on vegetation and goes to the pupal stage and re-emerges as another insect, insect as a moth, or it emerges as an adult butterfly. Now this life cycle, and from the moth, when the caterpillar emerges, there is just a head, and it gradually develops the body and feeds on the vegetation and grows and goes into pupal stage. And in the pupal stage, the author shows that it is a process of double process of progression and retrogression. In the sense that caterpillar feeding on leaves build its own body, which is a lower form, and through pupation transforms into flying moth, a higher form. Now, when it feeds profusely on the plants and ceases to feed when full grown, builds a cocoon around itself. And the pupal stage, the most wonderful thing is its internal organs, the heart, kidney, stomach, digestive system, everything decomposes to basic elements and begin to build up a new different form. And from a lower form as a caterpillar, it re-emerges as a higher form of a flying moth. It's a highly organized internally and externally higher organism, or in the shape of a flying moth or a butterfly emerges. Now, coming to these colors, patterns of birds, insects, and flowers. Now, Wallace and Darwin, both of them have some common views about this, but there is a difference between their perspectives. Darwin says it is color pattern of birds and insects and flowers are mainly for the purpose of cross-fertilization. And we know that nature always prefers cross-fertilization to self-fertilization. And Darwin says that beauty of color, form, variety can be explained by natural selection as a blind, uh, purposeless, random process and adaptation for self-protection. But the view of Wallace is different. He says, besides serving a limited purpose for biological needs, it is basically to please and refine mankind. And he says the whole of the ancient world knew this, as it can be seen in their sacred literature and ancient books. And then he goes on to say that use of colors to man is not the same as use of colors to the insect or to the butterfly. Some limited purpose is there, but it's not the same purpose as it is meant for man. And he, his thesis is that human perception of colors is bound up with his higher intellectual development. It has not a survival value, but it has a related aesthetic and moral attributes of that. Now, regarding colors of flowers, what Darwinists say is that serve to attract insects. And color is absent when cross-fertilization by wind is a rule. And Darwinists are of the opinion the beauty of flowers serve the purpose as guides to insects and birds. And the various adaptations of flowers are for the purpose of facilitating cross-fertilization and protection. And it says variety of form, structure, color of flowers can all of this can be explained by theory of variation and natural selection. Now, the author says that the later researchers have disputed this and disproved this last assertion. Now, what is the view of Wallace? He says it serves the aesthetic refinement of man. Insects and birds may distinguish, we can never know by color perception. But use of colors to man is not the same as the use of colors for insects or birds. Now, the beauty, the pattern, the harmony of colors, the designs that we see in nature, in color, in birds, in insects, in flowers, and so on, they are removed from any material use or survival value. If survival value was the chief object, nature would have designed a simpler devices. That's his argument. Human color perception, he says, is bound up with higher intellectual development. If total absence of colors were there, then mankind would not have evolved either in science or in arts and culture. So color perception has given to man higher moral and aesthetic attributes for development of a spiritual nature. This must be noted. Now, he says that man's physical makeup, his mental and moral faculties developed to perfection can never be explained by the natural selection of Darwinian scheme. It is necessary to postulate action of continuous guidance of higher intelligences, all heading towards one single end, which is development of intelligent, intellectual, moral, and spiritual beings. So, in other words, Wallace is suggesting that besides biological evolution and culminating in the most perfect crown piece of evolution of man, and not only as a physical form, but also in his intellectual and moral and spiritual development, is not limited to or ends in human development, but goes further on into, he evolves into a spiritual being. That's his thesis. All this marvelous minerals, plants, animals evolved to highest development in diversifying lines. Besides serving their evolutionary needs, they were also adapted to serve man's purpose, his material needs, his development of higher faculties. The very beauty, design, and symmetry of form and color serve that purpose. These cannot be explained. I mean, these color patterns and designs and cannot be for mere protection. Its purpose can only be to evoke in human recognition of a guiding power, recognition of a supreme mind directing and organizing the blind forces of nature. Now, he says that this harmonious co-adaptation and mutual dependence of man and plant is definitely a proof of design. He says that two kinds of kingdoms evolved to make the earth a possible dwelling place for man. And the mystery of chlorophyll and photosynthesis is something so mysterious and so marvelous that we cannot dwell much upon it, and we will pass on because of a constraint of time. Chlorophyll and photosynthesis, converting the light energy and from the sun and the carbon dioxide and the water to form sugar and oxygen, and providing the energy for the animal, the herbivores and carnivores and human energy, food needs. And all this occurs in chloroplast, in the plant leaves, in algae, and so on. And if you closely study this, you clearly see a purpose and very intelligent, constructive, directive process. And he goes on to show you can never replicate it in a laboratory. They're purely a life process, an intelligent life process. Now, coming to the varieties of woods, resins, vegetable oils, perfumes, dyes, spices. Now, these have a protective use of plants, and in some ways as a use for animal species, but their principal use is for human medicinal, culinary, and artistic needs. And we cannot go into the evidence that it brings forward in great profusion to substantiate this is very interesting, but we have to only confine ourselves to this statement. Now, out of these few elements of 120 in this time, 70 or so elements, only a dozen or so elements in combination among themselves and with others produce innumerable products of diversified properties. It's all for the purpose of to cater to the needs and progressive needs of biological life and the higher purpose of human existence. That's his main thesis. So the single cell organisms are alive and that they exhibit the potentialities of higher animals. They have the potentialities of developing into human organism, human body and faculties. And this mystery of cell division, building complex biological organism which are self-repairing, self-renewing, they're all they're clearly indicative of intelligent direction and organization. Especially the process of nutrition, assimilation, and growth by uh, physical and chemical action. This is this can never happen merely by physical and chemical action, but it would be impossible without organizing intelligent directive power brooded over by mind. And cell nucleus clearly, which is a seat of heredity and directive process of cell division and uh, development, is an action of vital force. And in it, he brings forward excellent uh, illustrations to show that this can never be explained by mechanical or uh, processes. It is clearly a vital function, and a vital function with underlying intelligent impulse acting on physical forces. And he explains the seasonal growth of antlers, which is a marvel truly. In 1 year, how the antlers shed and regrow with such precision and such efficiency and purpose. It can never be explained by simply mechanical uh, laws of merely physical and chemical forces, chemical laws. Now, he goes on to give extensive evidence in favor of intelligence and purpose in evolution in the element of water in relation to the world life, and especially in relation to man, the elements in relation to man, and mystery of carbon and water in relation to man. It makes a marvelous study, but we have to simply pass on because time constraint will not permit us to uh, go in detail about this. We'll skip this. And then coming to the purpose and limitation of pain, there are many views. Um, there are many views among the evolutionists. Now, question is nature cruel? Is nature's autophagus ways the apparent cruelty in predator-prey relation and absence of any evidence of compassion, apparently, uh, and many scientists and others have expressed that it is a nightmare and a horror, and especially when suffering comes during natural calamities. Now, it has given rise to pessimism and agnosticism, and you begin to question how can the all-wise God bring this about, and so on. So it has given rise to skepticism and pessimism. Now, Darwin's view is, and Darwin and Wallace concur in this with a little difference. Now, object of pain in evolution of higher animals, there is a clear purpose for that. And he goes on to show that what they call war of nature is not constant and always does not happen. And his observation, according to his observation, now when prey is caught by the predator, but the prey no fear is felt. Death is generally prompt, and it serves a purpose in uh, evolving the most vigorous, which is to survive. And the principle of utility is the Darwinian principle that no organ, sensation, or faculty evolved except for utility to species. Now, sensation of pain is proportional to its needs, proportionate to its needs, and less pain in lower orders designed to be devoured, and longer lived species need greater sensation and pain for its own preservation. So, man, he goes on to show, is required to be more sensitive to pain. And Wallace shows that the claws, the canine, the teeth, they're mainly for the purpose of holding the prey, not so much to um, cause pain. So the general conclusions, author comes to general conclusions. He goes on to show that out of the, in his time, 70 or so elements, now many more. 1/5 of that known elements through varied combinations among themselves, one fifth of them, 1/5 those elements among themselves and with others produce endless varieties of natural life forms with overwhelming complexity. And chemical transformations produced by living plants are, in fact, extraordinary. The point that Wallace makes is it cannot be by action of blind forces, but it is due to directive intelligence acting on physical forces. And in building complex tissues and special products, it is inconceivable without postulating action of some controlling and directive power. And his argument is development of life culminates in man, not merely as a perfect physical form, but also towards his higher aesthetic and moral development. He argues that human evolution is special, and the biological evolution, through biological evolution, the higher needs of association with biological evolution, the higher needs of intellectual and moral and spiritual development of man is also uh, also takes place. So that's his argument. In other words, that the biological evolution is the means and the tool for development of higher faculties of man. Now, there are two worldviews on this. What is the nature of the controlling and directing power? There are two views about this. One is theological, the other is scientific view. Now, what does the religious view say? Mostly Western religious theological view. It is creation by God, infinite, eternal, omnipotent God, through his God. This is the theological view. Now, science says there are no existence, there can be no such evolution or creation possible at all other than by blind forces. There are no existence apart from blind forces. Now, Wallace rejects both these views. Both ideas, he says, are irrational. And he suggests whole purpose of material universe, whole purpose of evolution of material universe is development of spiritual beings. And the spiritual beings are infinite in their variety of nature and character, which is the efficient cause of the infinite variety of organic and inorganic species in the world of matter. So the whole of world of matter with its infinite variety has for its efficient cause a hierarchy of intelligent beings. And this lower evolutionary development serves and promotes the higher evolution. Such variety could never have been produced in any other way. That's his argument. Now, this whole vast system of cooperation of grades of beings in intelligence and power, from the highest hierarchy down to the lowest one, to the level of the soul or the cell, which Huxley called a cell soul. It is for the purpose of, it is transformation of the idea of ideal into concrete form and unfoldment of the cosmic idea into concrete evolutionary development. So now look at the argument of Wallace here. The broad outline of the universe to be is the ideation of the supreme infinite mind. The idea of the universe to be is already there in the supreme mind. And through transmission of what he calls transference of thought or emanation to lower order of hierarchies, ideation impressed on the highest, from the highest to the next highest by creative willpower, the primal universal ether, upon which the hierarchy, the next hierarchy, develop from that its elements of matter and forces to form the vast system of the world, the nebulae, suns, stellar universes, and so on. The angelic hosts combine in themselves those conditions or elements of constitution of great elements to form the life world, from the lowest form of life to the most complex human form over billions of ages. Now, he gives the idea of this hierarchy of intelligent forces in three orders. The highest, the supreme, infinite, intelligent mind, having the idea of the thing to be, and the next lower hierarchy having got the impression of those thoughts form in the world of ether, the required constituents, and impressing these upon the lowest order of angelic hierarchies, who act upon the physical world and concretize the elements and establish life centers to begin the process of organization and give an impulse to development and evolution of life with accuracy and certainty. So he speaks of three distinct orders, the highest containing the idea, the middle order working upon the model, and the lowest order transferring them into physical types and giving them the impulse. So this thought transference from highest source down the ladder of being infuse into the primary forms the plan of development. And this is overseen and guided by intelligent powers. And what is the ultimate purpose of all this? The ultimate end being production of human form. Now, he's not talking of any theological God at all. It is distinctly different from the creationist, biblical creationist idea. He's not talking of any omnipotent, benevolent God at all. He says it is not a one being, it is not a one directing agent, but a hierarchy of intelligent forces. Just see this quote. See this citation from him. He says, I have suggested that this vast and wonderful universe with its almost infinite variety of forms, motions, reactions of part upon part, from suns and systems upon systems up to plant life, animal life, the human living soul, has ever required and still requires a continuous, coordinated agency of myriads of such intelligences. He says this is the best approximation we can formulate as to the fundamental cause of matter and force, life and consciousness, and man himself. And he says the man is destined to a permanent progressive existence in the world of spirit. So this is the broad outline of the review of the book of Wallace's World of Life as very well articulated by the author in his book, The Intelligent Evolution. Now, we'll conclude here because I think we have exceeded the time by more than 20 minutes. We will stop and consider any points that anyone may have. Thank you then.
Seems like the author is trying to tell us that Wallace really pointed towards the idea of intelligent evolution and rather involution and then evolution. Is that the final point that we're coming out with? At least to this student, it's very, I didn't think that that's what Wallace was trying to say.
Murali's point was, finally, can we say that Wallace is postulating an involution of consciousness followed by a subsequent evolution? Is that the point that he is making at the end of all his analysis and presentation of his theory? Is that the point? That's the question.
Now, the point is whether Wallace, in his World of Life, makes any specific statement to the effect that this whole process of evolution, guided by intelligent direction, by the action of hierarchies of being as efficient cause, imply primarily an involution of the universal model and the subsequent evolution. Does he postulate this? As far as I understand, he does not make any such statement, as far as I understand, as far as I know. But extending the same logical argument and simple common sense, we can infer that. Now, what does evolution mean? Evolution means unfoldment. Unfoldment of what? Unfoldment of what already there, potentially. So, if out of the unicellular creature, like an amoeba, from that evolutionary process can develop higher organisms of great complexity, the potentiality must be there, must have been there already in the unicellular organism. So it is unfoldment of what's potentially there. But Wallace doesn't speak of it. I suppose there's a logical conclusion or logical extension of Wallace's scheme of teleological cosmology. There's a logical extension to his teleological scheme. Otherwise, we cannot explain evolution at all. Basic principle is there can be no evolution unless there is an involution. We can perhaps say we can infer from his teleological worldview or cosmology. But he doesn't say any, specifically he doesn't mention that in this book, as far as I understand.
Not necessarily the word involution, but ideas that infer towards to as a who is describing because if I think that seems to be
Only your voice is breaking.
the Darwinists.
Your voice is breaking. I can't hear you.
So that seems to be the idea of involution and evolution. A differing point between Wallace and Darwin, and even though Wallace may not have used the word involution, has he inferred that, or has the author in his book inferred anything directly relating to the idea?
The book we have reviewed.
Realistic evolution is what Darwin has been saying.
The author whose book we are reviewing, he doesn't mention that at all. He doesn't make any such inference.
What is the key difference between Darwin and Wallace? If you want to point out from a metaphysical point as a student of from a student of higher life, where do they really contrast in the context of higher life, Darwin and Wallace?
Can someone repeat the question and make it more explicit?
No, I did not get the question.
A little louder, please.
I did not get the question. Can Murali repeat the question or type it out maybe?
So I'll try. Am I audible now? I'll just be a little louder. Am I audible?
Yes.
Better.
Yeah. So in the context of higher life, if you have to say what would be the real, if you had to point out some difference, what would be the real difference in the context of higher life between Wallace's understanding of evolution and the Darwinian theory. If Wallace has not pointed out to involution, I think evolution is something of the physical animal is something what Darwin definitely mentioned. And so what would you say in the context of higher life is a pointer to the difference between the two theories?
Now, this is already been made quite clear during the presentation that there's a fundamental difference. In the school of mechanistic school of mechanistic school of modern science, matter is everything, and there is no vital force or no such intelligent intervention. Just matter and physical forces or brings about all this development and evolutionary progress, and the whole of phenomena, natural phenomena and evolution can be explained by means of this material or physical and chemical and biological laws. That is the basic argument. And now, what has this worldview brought? What is the kind of worldview that it speaks about? It basically connotes that there is nothing more than mere physical and chemical and biological laws and material world, and the evolution takes place through random mutation, variations, adaptations, and survival of the fittest in the struggle for existence. So this is a worldview that we hold at the present time today, and we have shown in the previous, the last week's book review, that this kind of a worldview has given rise to materialistic idea of human civilization. In the sense, this is extended to the eugenics and the idea of natural selection through genetic mutation. You can produce higher forms of human beings, and this idea was carried out and as a project in the Western world, and it led to a terrible Holocaust in Germany, as you know, and our social and economic political philosophy has a very clear undertone of this mechanistic, materialistic worldview. And Wallace's worldview of teleological, the teleological synthesis of biological evolution gives us an insight into the hidden purpose and hidden design and directive principle. And only this can explain the whole of a synthetical view and purpose of the whole of evolutionary development. And in the Wallacean worldview, I will read a portion of it if time permits. He says that the moral and intellectual and aesthetic development of man is the line along which the higher human evolution takes place towards suprahuman suprahuman evolutionary development. And this is the entirely a different line of evolution. The biological evolution ultimately lead to this, but this culminates in that. And in this, he shows that how man becomes very responsible in his relation with the world around him, the lower forms of life, and his aesthetic and moral development will bring up a sense of responsibility and creativity heading which impels towards higher evolution of man. And it is through this that it is through this higher development, higher intellectual and moral development that humankind begins to sense the inner, the overseeing supreme mind or the supreme soul, which contains all, which is the supreme organizing, directing force and power. And in that unity of vision and perception, it is in that development that higher evolution of human civilization takes place. So that is the basic idea of basic worldview of Wallace. And to me, it appears that it is most relevant to the modern world today. It needs this worldview. It needs this, this insight into the efficient causes of things, into the fact that vital force and consciousness and intelligent directing will is apart from the physical and chemical and biological forces upon which these act. It is only this awakening, this recognition, and this perception will make for higher civilization. It makes for a better world, a more compassionate world, a more progressive world in the right direction, a harmonious development towards a higher life. So the purpose of the author in editing Wallace's World of Life is to stimulate this line of thought among the people in the academic world and among the general public. So you yourself can figure out whether this is relevant to the higher life objects and vision of higher life institute or not.